Hello and welcome to Freedom After Speech. I'm Harry Doherty.
I'm Jonah Lazarus.
And what should we talk about? It's election day, so maybe...
It is. Well, unfortunately, so I requested a postal vote ballot up here in Leeds back when I was in London, but it hasn't actually arrived. So for all I know, it could come within the next couple of days for Mayor of London or for my local area. Mayor of London is the big one, which I want to vote for, because that will be the first time I've actually been able to vote in something.
Yeah, now I remember when I first voted, it was for Zac Goldsmith in 2016. That was the first time I was... well, no, it wasn't the first time I was able to vote. I was at work in the 2015 election, and by the time I finished my shift, I ran to the polling station, and then they told me I was too late, so I couldn't vote that time. But I voted for Zac Goldsmith in the mayoral elections a year later. I can't remember who the second candidate was. Might have been
Peter Whittle, maybe?
I think you're going to hate me for this. I think I might have voted for Galloway as a laugh as my second choice, just over his foreign policy for what it's worth. And then
I forgot Galloway was standing in London.
Yeah, he was. But Zac Goldsmith was my primary choice, and it's a shame he didn't win, to be honest.
What are your predictions as far as today goes? I mean, I'm sure he'll get in comfortably.
Oh, Khan, yeah, he will. Unfortunately, I'd be amazed if any. I mean, I'd love it if David Curtin or Lawrence Fox or even Piers Corbyn won, but it's not going to happen, is it? And
no, he's currently set. And I think I remember reading that he's meant to get in on the first round, while Bailey, I mean, the Tories completely gave up on his campaign a few weeks back. And what's more, he was something like 10, 20 points behind them or whatever. I mean, it's frankly quite embarrassing just how far the party has fallen, even compared to a few years ago. I don't even think Goldsmith lost by that much in London, did he?
No, I'm not sure. I feel like Khan just has such a grip over the city, and he's as much going to win it as Boris was back in 2012, really, and there's just no way around it. I think he will. I think his miserable reign will come to an end sooner or later, and I think
it's got to, because he's been a complete disaster as far as mayor goes. I mean, you only need to look at the data regarding crime in London to know just how shocking these last 5 years have been under Khan.
And not just shocking, but his indifference to it. Now, I've always believed that the crime situation in London is not solely due to Sadiq Khan, because London does face crime waves. It's happened before. I don't want to sort of blame Khan for things that are somewhat beyond his control, but he hasn't shown any real compassion or any sense of concern or alarm. It's been a complete dismissal. He's
sort of denied that there is a crisis of it at all. I think he only said this week or something that London is safer now than it was when he took over as mayor, which is just a blatant lie.
Exactly. I mean, just think, if the crime in London happens the same, but Khan was at least, this is terrible, I take responsibility for this. We need
to do better on that.
We need to do better, but no, he's acted like the shit doesn't stink, and and I just think it's a really contemptuous attitude to have towards voters. It's and towards Londoners. So that's the problem with him, is if you're going to have a mayor of London, at least have someone who's got a little bit of grace, and he's got none of those qualities. Unfortunately, I don't think Sean Bailey offers that much. He wants to. He's big on all the youth projects, but I've watched BBC London News enough times in my life to know that they never seem to do what they're intended to do. It's all
Bailey. My problem with Bailey is always that, well, certainly as far as this year goes, that he appears to have been going on. He appears to have carried on as normal. He just looks like he's been sort of in a deep freeze for about a year, and they've defrosted him after a year and told him, yes, it's time for the Mayor of London campaign, and nothing has changed.
Yeah, he doesn't. What's quite funny about him is he doesn't really acknowledge COVID or lockdown. He
doesn't talk about it at all. He's not. Now, to give him credit, he's not a massive lockdowner. I mean, you won't. I haven't seen him at all make statements about how it was necessary or anything like that. But I haven't seen anything from him either way. So whilst he hasn't come out strictly for it, he hasn't come out strictly against it either. He hasn't. He's apparently it's just sort of not something that he's noticed. He hasn't noticed the lockdowns. If you take a look at any of his messaging, I think had this election been fought last year, he might have done a bit better, maybe.
I mean, I understand that as the Tory candidate, he would say that he has to toe the line. But as we've been coming out of restrictions, sort of, not really, he could have, without losing his position as candidate for the Conservative Party, he could have been like Steve Baker or one of those.
Yeah, he could have at least stuck his head up and said,
yeah.
He or said, you know, we need to lobby to lift them earlier. I mean, he is still on the London Assembly. He could have lobbied to sort of say to Sadiq Khan, I think that we should be, you know, the data clearly shows that things are not terrible in London. I think that we should be easing restrictions here or lifting them entirely. I mean, that is still within his power.
Certainly by November, December, he could have, without betraying the Tory leadership which backs him, he could have very easily framed it as we need to speed out these restrictions and get our freedom back, and we shouldn't have coercion with regards to vaccines. He could have been encouraging the vaccine but not encouraging coercion. He could have been saying, he could have even pretended that these restrictions were necessary but said enough is enough now. He could
especially
have
now they've stopped now they haven't been funding him. He honestly has no reason to show them any loyalty. For the fact they stopped funding him meant that he really could have taken that as an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to lift all restrictions if I become mayor and we will return to full normal. Because he's got nothing to lose that way, but instead he's just he's played it far too safe, which is very disappointing.
Yeah, exactly. I think if he had espoused in the last 3 months, if he had suddenly done a Ron DeSantis, who initially supported lockdowns and then didn't, if he had said lockdowns were a mistake and we need to get back to full normality, I think the sort of people who would have, I think he would have possibly, you know, gained enough support from Londoners to beat Sadiq Khan. People who might not bother voting or vote for Fox or Curtin or whoever, or people who are on the fence politically and thought, oh wow, a serious candidate actually is against lockdowns. I think,
yeah, or a small business owner who will have realised, here's someone who's actually going to help get me back on track.
Exactly.
Someone who's actually been open about that.
Because if Lawrence Fox or Piers Corbyn says I'm running for mayor, most people, even those who are against lockdowns and always have been, are going to be like, yeah, but they're not going to get in. But if a Tory candidate says, yeah, we must go back to normal,
yeah, then you're in with a chance.
Yeah, and I think people would bother to vote, and all those votes would accumulate, and that would possibly take him over the finish line first. But he didn't. So Bailey, when this video goes out, and you're sitting in your living room, not Mayor of London, you know, it's
he'll end up. They'll try to put him up as a candidate sometime in the future. I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, I used to like him
Speaking of
times, but
yeah. Speaking of Fox, one thing I am hoping that he beats. I'm not sure if you've been following all the candidates, but I mean there are 20 of them. I hope he does beat that irritating YouTuber.
Which irritating YouTuber is that?
Fosh.
Elaborate.
Oh, so if you haven't been following, so Fosh he's a young guy, posh guy, went to the same school as Lawrence. He's running as mayor of London just to get more votes than Lawrence Fox. Annoyingly, I think he'll probably succeed. He's got quite a large base, quite a young base, first time voting. There's quite a lot in there that he can capitalize on. And the annoying, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of him, but some of the stuff he's been doing has just been frankly obsessive. You know, going around to their offices, delivering stuff, following Lawrence around while he's campaigning.
That's a creepy thing to do. I mean, you should get a restraining order, really.
Yeah. I mean, his newest video, which I saw, just featured him. So he went outside their offices, the Reclaim's offices, for some sort of debate or whatever. and then proceeded to quite literally follow him and Martin Daubney when they were on Westminster Bridge. He just showed up behind them with a camera.
There's always one of those. You get those candidates. I think the elite handpicks them to disrupt candidates they don't like. Like when Nigel Farage was running for South Thanet back in 2015.
Like there were when they stuck Al Murray up or whatever.
Yeah, there was Al Murray, and there was this other guy who was an even bigger troll, who wasn't especially famous, but he campaigned for loads of silly things like I will ban the flag of St George or something like that. And I remember he was distributing leaflets around the East Kent area, and I was in a pub one time, and then this sort of UKIP bloke burst into the pub saying, "Have you seen what this bloke's been sending to our letterboxes? Look at this!" And it was literally like some "I will ban the flag of St George" and stick Broadstairs into the sea. And to be fair, the guy really did wind up a lot of UKIP voters, and it was
it was quite annoying. This one, however, I mean, I took a look at some more of his content just so I wanted to figure out a bit more about who he was. The only other sort of semi-political content he had was when he went to an anti-mask rally and started laughing at the people there, because nothing quite says subversive, edgy content than basically saying, "Oh look, I believe everything that the government has told me over the last year." Went there in a mask and that sort of business. He's not a serious candidate, but at the same time, I don't believe that he is. I don't buy into this narrative that he's the comedy candidate who's here to upset the establishment, Lawrence Fox.
Yeah, that's the stuff about that really annoys me, because it's like with that Lee Nelson bloke, where your satire involves making fun of people who are already outliers and underdogs. Like, shouldn't proper satire make fun of people who are powerful, go against the grain? I was
thinking of sort of like what Sacha Baron Cohen does in all his stuff. Because Sacha Baron Cohen always picks the same. He goes after the same group of people, which he has done for years. Goes after these random people in the middle America, usually working class, and then annoys them to the applause of his much wealthier fan base.
No, exactly. He just goes around the world, and he did it with that Grimsby film a few years ago, where he just sneers at people, and then like Frankie Boyle, extremely unsavoury and at times unpleasant, and then has the nerve to lecture us on social justice.
Cohen came out a few years ago about how it was important to tackle extremism, and Facebook should be fact-checking people's posts. The fact that he, of all people, was talking about the dangers of offensive jokes or whatever is extremely ironic for a man who's made his career as Borat and Ali G.
Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah.
I don't have a problem with these characters. I think they're quite funny personally, but you can't exactly go and make your career out of that and then start telling people how much you care about standing up against bigotry and that sort of
thing. Yeah, no, quite. Who's your favourite Sacha Baron Cohen character, if you have any?
I think it is probably Borat, but from the first one, not this new version that they produced in Borat 2, where
Borat was, I have to admit, quite funny in parts.
Borat was funny.
Particularly the bit in Kazakhstan was. I think they actually filmed it in Romania, but it did give.
Yeah, they didn't film it in Kazakhstan.
No, I quite liked. Have you seen where? Personally, I quite like Ali G the most. I think that was the closest to edgy, in the genuine sense. And I thought his interview it was extremely like rude, but the one where he interviewed Posh and Bex, and you could just see David Beck. It was for comic relief, and he's interviewing Victoria mainly, and you can see David Beckham is just sitting there, and you can tell he just wants to weigh him in. And Sacha Baron knows that he can't because it's on comic relief, and it is painfully funny to watch. But yeah, then not really someone who's well placed to lecture others, shall we say?
No, and neither. And that's what I'm hoping that Fox does. I'm well aware that he doesn't have a chance of winning, but so long as he beats that one, because otherwise we'll be treated to weeks of people insisting that Lawrence Fox is a political failure, which I wouldn't say is strictly true.
Well, it's too soon to call him a failure, because we'll have to see.
He hasn't been in the fray that long.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if this is just a sort of midlife crisis, I'll have a go at being a politician thing, and he quits politics after this, then he will be basically a failure in politics, if not as a
Yes.
commentator. But if he's serious, which I think he is, and he
I
carries.
think he is as well, because I mean, there's not a chance he's not going to work again as an actor. Let's be clear. But he accepted that. I think he did an interview the other day where he accepted that yes, he is very much a former actor.
Yeah.
Right? There's not a chance that.
Yeah, no, he's he's done for in that industry. I'm afraid although the thing is, if the culture changes, it may become easier for non-woke actors to get their foot in the door again. And I think that's why he's gone into politics, so that I think he wants to create a society where it's easier for people to disagree amicably. Because the sad thing is, in real life, I find people generally do overcome their political differences. But the higher up you go, the more narrow it gets. In the upper echelons of society, like journalism and show business particularly, but also academia and the arts, it gets a lot narrower, the Everton window. I think if the upper echelons of society had the same range of acceptable opinions as your average Wetherspoons, for instance, I think we'd be a much happier and healthier country.
First story of the week, chances are Khan will get in on the first round, and he'll get in on the first round. But interestingly, the Tories are meant to do well in other elections across the country today.
Are they? Oh yeah, well, this is the problem with the Tories, is no matter, they're geniuses. No matter what they do to you, they can destroy the country. They can betray.
I don't think they're going to win Hartlepool today by virtue of that. I think they'll win in Hartlepool today by virtue of Labour being so utterly awful. I don't think that they'll be winning on the basis of them being any good.
I think it's more rejection of Labour than an endorsement of the Conservatives. But I think the problem with the Conservatives is because Labour is so obviously hostile to Britain, the Tories are able to sound off a bit about how patriotic they are. They have no problems waving the flag and singing "God Save the Queen" and appearing patriotic. I call it Top Gear patriotism. It's superficial, but it's not actively hostile. As
on the subject of the way that the British establishment actually does treat patriots, Johnny Mercer has been quite vocal in the news this week about what's been going on with Northern Ireland. I'm sure you've been following that.
Yes, Johnny Mercer. I remember when he called James Delingpole a selfish C word about a year ago because he didn't wear a mask, and I wrote a rather angry email to Johnny Mercer at the time. But then they asked me, could you provide your postal code? I don't live in his constituency, so I couldn't go beyond that. But yeah, he was one of my least favourite Tory MPs at the height of the first lockdown. But
he's quite a pro-lockdown one as well, from what I can remember.
He's a squaddy. He takes orders, but one thing he is as well as that is he's loyal to his officers, and I think that's credit where due, because the Tories have treated their soldiers disgustingly, and what's worse is they pretend to be on the side of the British Armed Forces, and they're not. As we were saying a few weeks ago, we're going to give soldiers amnesty except in Northern Ireland. And
yeah, I mean, what's the point? Where else? I mean, why not give amnesty in Northern Ireland in case you need? I mean, surely that would just effectively be handing our troops over to the IRA again.
And it's a great pity that we gave into the IRA back in the late 90s. They're horrible people. They murdered children. They murdered young people in pubs. And the fact that British soldiers should be put on trial while they're
allowed to effectively run the Republic of Ireland now. I believe Sinn Féin are actually the government in Ireland, are they not?
They co-run it with the DUP, who've been cut, as it were, into compromising with these evil people. They've it's an absolute disgrace, the fact that Martin McGuinness was able to be the Deputy First Minister for Northern Ireland, the Education Minister, the fact that Gerry Adams is able to go over to America and raise money for Sinn Féin, and that Mary Lou McDonald in the Republic is able to.
Yes, she's quite a big name in Ireland as well.
She's the fact that these that the political wing of a terrorist organisation is treated as a mainstream normal party in Europe.
That people would vote for. I mean, I
Disgrace.
vaguely remember people on the hard left endorsing them at the last Irish election, and it's just shocking that either they know about the fact that this is the political wing of the IRA and don't care, or they don't know, in which case there's a serious problem with ignorance.
Do you know what I think it is? Because Sinn Féin and the IRA, they wear suits, and they're British Isles people.
Yes, they traded the balaclavas in for a suit, exactly. And now everyone thinks that they're respectable.
Exactly. So people have this idea of what a terrorist should look like. They think of Osama bin Laden in a cave in a desert, with his long beard and sitting down with a Kalashnikov against the wall and all that. They don't realise that it's possible to wear a sharp suit and have dinner with the Queen. And to celebrate St. Patrick's Day at the White House and be just as bad as Osama bin Laden. I had an argument with an English teacher about this, an English teacher at an actual grammar school, and he was
about Sinn Féin.
He was saying, I wrote in an essay, I think I said Jerry Adams and bin Laden in the same sentence, and he said, are they really comparable? And I said, yes, they are. They were both mouthpieces for mass murder. People, and for one example is the Brighton bomber, the guy who killed, I think, 5 people. He badly.
This is the one who tried to kill Margaret Thatcher, yes?
That's right, yeah. And Norman Tebbit and his wife, who recently died in December last year, were among the victims. And the man who did that, I can't quite remember his name, so I won't second guess. He's a free man, and he's not remorseful. But unfortunately, quite a lot of IRA victims' families confuse excuse making with genuine remorse. So what they always say is they say things like, "Oh well, I'm sorry that lives were lost, but it was a war and it was necessary at the time, and we had no choice." No, they did have a choice. They could have used lawful democratic methods, as we're using now to oppose lockdown, but they didn't. They resorted to violence, and there's no excuse for that.
And for them, and they're treated as just another reputable force, while British soldiers are expected to be prosecuted. I mean, if it was a war and things were done, then you apply that to both sides, surely.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's. I think there's a real problem in Britain where I think we have it worse than any country in the world, where we actively go against our own national interest. Because not many people, even among sort of Leave voting types, I don't really get much of a sense that people are angry about this. There's not enough anger about what the IRA did in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. They blew up children outside McDonald's restaurants. They butchered teenagers in those pubs in Birmingham. They burned people to death in a restaurant in Northern Ireland, and a whole other range of awful things. And Jean McConville's murder, they dragged a woman because they accused this mother of 10 kids of being a collaborator, and they dragged her from her home in front of her kids, and kidnapped her, and her body was found on a beach 40 years later. And they did all this stuff, and they get away with it. And yeah.
No, instead you're meant to hear about the nasty things that the British did, or that the Unionists did in that conflict.
Exactly. I mean, they talk about Bloody Sunday, which Douglas Murray has written an excellent book about, by the way. It tells you it's a very balanced version of events. The difference is when British soldiers open fire and civilians get killed, it's rightly regarded as an outrage,
as a massacre, yes.
As something that shouldn't have happened, and it's investigated, and we never hear the end of it. And but when the IRA kill innocent people, that to them is a success. It's necessary. So and how they have the brass neck to then act like they're the victims is beyond me.
I think Johnny Mercer said this week that the government was, I think, what was it? He said it was the most distrustful organisation that he'd ever worked in, wasn't it?
What was? Oh, the government.
Johnny Mercer, how he described the government over this.
No, he has. Yeah, no. The thing is with ministers and MPs and civil servants is they're not the most high caliber people these days. they're, as Peter Hitchens put it in his column last Sunday, they're shallow careerists mainly. Did you see what Dr. What was her name? Dr. Ros Jones had to say on Talk Radio the other day?
Yes, because the new proposal for this week, for anyone who hasn't followed, is that the government has now suggested that we roll out the vaccine to secondary school children because reasons, and on top of that, we've got headmasters insisting that children will take it because of peer pressure, something which I believe that anybody who's been to school was told to resist.
It's, when I was at school, kids were the ones doing the peer pressure. Now it's the teachers. I think I benefited hugely from resisting peer pressure to take drugs when I was at school. I think I'd be in a funny farm if I'd done cannabis or anything else.
We were all told to resist peer pressure back then, but no, now it's peer pressure is going to be a useful tool.
No, it's just evil for I think the way a lot of teachers, not all teachers, but teaching leadership bodies have behaved in the last year has been disgusting, because teachers are supposed to be calm, rational, wise people, role models to children, and now they're encouraging fear and now bullying.
I think there was a union this week that insisted that face masks must be continued to be worn in schools during the day, as a means of protecting teachers from their own students, which is just nonsense.
Even if masks did work, I would oppose that, because I don't want to live in a world where you see someone and you don't see a human being, you see a vector of plague, and it creates an unnecessary sense of alarm. If the evidence on masks was strong and this was like, say, 1918, then I'd get it, but it's not. It just isn't, and they don't make a difference either way anyway. The evidence isn't strong enough.
What Dr. Jones said this week was that there is absolutely no need to start rolling out the vaccine to secondary school children at all, or to create this culture of telling children that if they don't take it, they'll be killing their grandparents.
It's an evil thing to do. I think it's psychological. It is child abuse, is what it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're doing it as well. They're talking about letting vaccinated children have more freedoms in summer camps in America. Yeah, that's what Dr. Fauci's been doing. And there's they're working lockstep. It's the same pattern in Canada, the USA, here. They're all at the same time saying we need children vaccinated. When Matt Hancock said in November that this is an adult vaccine, and children do not need to.
Yeah, we don't need to give it to children.
So, as always, if they say one thing, they're going to say another in a few months.
Precisely. I mean, the one thing that we've learned over the last year is that whenever they say that something isn't happening, it means it will happen just a few weeks later. But I've been trying to work out who is actually worse with whether we have it worse in the UK with Sage, or whether America has it worse with Fauci in terms of public health.
Well, I think they're all the same. I mean, there's a similar. If you follow Ivor Cummins on Twitter, there's a similar body, often made up of the same people like Gabriel Scally in Ireland. They've got an equivalent of Sage, and Australia's very much the same. It's the same sort.
Australia's not letting people in until 22.
That's insane, isn't it?
They're having no tourists until 22. I mean, I'm fully aware that this is a country that started out life as a prison colony, but they don't need to revert. They don't need to revert back to that.
I think this might be something in what you say there about it being a penal colony, because they seem to have embraced tyranny even more than we have. And I always had Australia down as quite a free, happy-go-lucky country, but it's not. It's extremely compliant. It makes the English look rebellious.
They actually do have zero COVID, I think, is what they're not zero COVID cases, but zero COVID as a policy. Which is just ridiculous in a country like Australia.
It might be that kind of obedience has been drummed into them by the fact that their ancestors were people who were, on your feet, go outside, stand there, do this, Third Fleet for you. I think that the obedience that becomes mandatory when you're in a prison may have been passed on, so it comes naturally to them. Because I think it did shock. I think the reason there was so much particular attention given to Melbourne last year, when there were similar lockdowns in Spain and Italy, I think the reason there was so much emphasis was because it's an Anglosphere nation. So when you see that kind of police
I
state brutality.
think even our media had problems with the way they were handling it in Melbourne. There was that video last year of a man actually being restrained by 2 police officers while they put a mask over him.
Yeah, that was frightening to watch. That showed what it's all about. It's all about making people powerless, and that's really what the mask is about.
Yeah, even our media picked up on that, and they weren't celebrating Melbourne as a success story. They were saying that I think they were sued, weren't they, in Melbourne?
They were
taking a court over. I think their government was taken to court over their handling, weren't they?
How did that go? Were the courts looking like they are here, or?
I don't remember what the verdict was, but I do remember vaguely that they were taken to court over basically being far too heavy-handed with their lockdowns.
Well, I mean, they were probably the strictest regime, certainly in the English-speaking world, because
apart from New Zealand.
Apart from New Zealand, yeah. The thing is with New Zealand,
which is a Chinese satellite state now.
It is. It was more short-lived in New Zealand because they have the benefit of being far away from anywhere, and so they can just take credit for nature doing its course.
Yeah, this is why I never understood people praising. I never understood people praising them. Never.
No, it's because they praise New Zealand for the same reason they hate Brazil. It's they like the person in charge there. That's the only.
Yeah, anyone who knows anything about New Zealand knows that it takes a day to get there from anywhere. I mean, New Zealand, as I've said for a while, New Zealand has been socially distanced from the entire world for years. They didn't need, it's not much effort to say, right, nobody's coming in. Nobody comes in anyway.
Yeah, when my granddad was in the Merchant Navy back in the 1930s, he said that the old joke was that New Zealand was closed because it was just so dead there. It was it's a long way away, and people might as well praise the penguins in Antarctica for their leadership. If they're going to praise Jacinda.
Yeah, nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's going there.
And they ignore the best example because I'd say even better than Sweden is Japan, because Japan had the same sort of limits as Sweden, but it's twice.
No official lockdown in Japan as such.
No lockdown at all. They advised people to stay home, but they didn't force it, and restaurants weren't forced to close. They didn't close the economy.
They had measures, didn't they? Masks and distancing and such.
I think masks were not. I don't think
not mandatory, but they did have them sort of encouraged.
I think they're encouraged, but not mandatory, and people wear them. But and it's easy, and people will say, "Oh, that was why." But that's easy to get around with lockdown supporters, because there were so many other countries in the world that had stricter mask mandates than Japan. Spain, for instance, you have to wear them inside your car or in the sea. And Spain had some of the highest excess deaths we've seen in Europe. Far worse than Sweden. Oh yeah, Spain is one of the worst in terms of excess mortality. It's one of the worst.
How the hell do you tell people to wear a mask in the sea?
Well, no, that's what they passed a bill recently in the Spanish Parliament. I don't know if they've rescinded it since, but they literally said you have to wear a mask everywhere on the beach. So won't be going there this summer, even if I can.
No, I don't think. I'm pretty sure we can go when they publish the list. But even then, I think Laura Perrins was tweeting about it's not necessarily a free holiday because you've got to spend about £300 on testing both there and back.
It's it's just another sign of making sure the plebs don't go on holiday, because Piers Morgan, he can pay for 1,000 tests before his wallet starts to feel it. But
no, and people will be celebrating it to sort of, oh yay, we can go on holiday. I mean, you shouldn't be having to celebrate being able to leave your own country.
No, exactly. It's certainly not if you've been allowed. You should never be grateful for something that was once your inalienable freedom. We're now grateful for things. I'm not, but we are as a society. People have been conditioned to be grateful for things that were assumed.
Yeah, this isn't North Korea. We shouldn't be thankful to our benevolent overlords for letting us, take our masks off or sit inside a pub or go on holiday. It's not something we should be doing.
You watched North Korean documentaries about North Korea. There's a lot of them from about 10 years ago or so. And they're big on fireworks, a bit like they are in London at New Year, and they're big on public celebrations, and they're big on this clapping. It's
Yes, clapping the dear leader.
totalitarian country is clapping. That's one of the common features of it. And that's the thing. If a lot of people don't know that tyranny has symptoms. So when sliding into tyranny, it's a bit like getting cancer or disease. As the symptoms are there, and they might seem benign or mild in themselves, but they're a sign of something much worse that you need to get checked up. So a lot of people are complacent about a lot of things, but those of us who know how tyrannies begin, Naomi Wolf was saying this to James Delingpole, it doesn't start with the mass graves and the gas chambers and all that. It starts with propaganda, with censorship, with demonization, and then it becomes violent. So I'd say we're probably around about the 1934 stage, if we're lucky.
We've got, I mean, the Fear Factory has been hard at work even this week. I mean, you can't go on Twitter without seeing these little adverts for the NHS insisting, you know, get your test, get tested. I mean, it might not, you know, you might be able to pass it on to somebody else or something like that.
I'm still getting them.
You must have seen that.
It's enough to make me want to go back to premium, because they say it could be your close friend, it could be your family, it could even be you. And it's like, and they don't tell you, oh, by the way, I wouldn't worry too much about it because it's the 99.85 survival.
Or sort of, no, even if it is you, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, they don't say that. They don't remind you that you know if you're under 60, your chances are practically nil. And even
the Fear Factory has been hard at work this week, and that it's been very effective. There was a video that someone put out this week of people being interviewed about going on holiday, and people saying, you know, oh no, we couldn't possibly go on holiday. We might bring back a new variant or something. I mean, that's how effective it's been.
It's tragic to see. I remember that there was that bloke in the mask, wasn't there, saying, why would you risk your life like that? And it's sad to see grown. He looked like a right-thinking member of society, or what would have been 2 years ago. He looked like a normal middle-aged bloke. And judging by the suit he was wearing, he seemed
he's definitely a professional of sorts.
He looked like a professional, definitely. And it's when you see professional, educated members of our society basically infantilized and reduced to quivering, you know, cowering submissives, it's quite a shocking thing to see. And you know, you see the ridiculous ones on TikTok, you know, where they walk in dressed in spacesuits, and you got to laugh at those. But a lot of the people who are
those, I can't believe some of them. Some of the videos of the measures people go to were actually walking around wrapped up in plastic, which I definitely remember for years we were all told not to do. We were all told for years, don't put a plastic bag on your head, and that was for years. I thought that was true, but now apparently if you don't put a plastic bag on your head, and then you're the crazy one and you're going to kill people.
Yeah, but I think it's important to remember as sort of, it is kind of funny, but it is also sad because they are basically victims of psychological abuse. They're victims of Susan Nickey and her, you know, they are now sufficiently threatened, as Sage put it. And it's paralyzing.
Is that actually the phrase that Sage used? I mean, I remember reading something about how Sage were worried about this time last year or something, that people weren't scared enough or whatever.
I have the document right here. I have it bookmarked. A substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. It could be that they are reassured by the low death rate in their demographic group. Although levels of concern may be rising, having a good understanding of the risk has been found to be positively associated with the adoption of social distancing measures in Hong Kong. The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messaging. To be effective, this must also empower people by making clear the actions they can take to reduce the threat. And they even had like a table of how you can threaten people and how effective it is likely to be. They really went into detail. So it's you've got statements.
What you just read out, that sounded as if it could have come out of a dystopian film.
Well, yeah, like that meme you shared the other day. You best start believing in dystopias, Miss Turner. You're in one.
You're in one. Yes.
That's one of my favourite memes of the year, I've got to say.
I came up with that one. I don't even think it was this year. I just came up with that one at some point in last year, just because everything was getting so utterly crazy. I just That was what came to my head.
Oh, that was your meme. That was you invented it.
Yeah, I made that. I made that one. I'm sure that somebody else has done it, but
Oh.
when I put together that one, yeah.
No, that is.
I mean, that does sound terrible. That Sage actually had a document working out how to frighten people.
Yeah, and it's kind of like if this was really like that movie Contagion, you wouldn't need to frighten people. If you have to tell people to stay indoors, then it probably isn't worth doing. If you have to convince people, if I just think the difference it would have made if we had sensible, responsible people like Ros Jones, John Lee, people like that advising the
Or
government.
Sunetra Gupta, who was actually brought onto one of their, what I think it was ITV or BBC, and they just shouted it. They just sort of talked over her the entire time, and she hardly got a word in.
The wrong sort of expert. And it's amazing because Sunetra Gupta was a celebrated epidemiologist just a few years ago. She's written for the Guardian, and she works at Oxford University, one of the best universities in the world.
But she's not a crackpot.
No, and I remember like Chris Bryant, the MP and the Labour MP, he had a heated argument with Dan Wootton last year, and he said, well, it's basically the majority of the world's leading scientists versus crackpots. He actually called the Great Barrington Declaration people crackpots. And these
I remember people laughing at the Great Barrington Declaration last year, insisting that it was unscientific nonsense.
Yeah.
It wasn't unscientific, it was different scientific. It's not, it just happens to be against it just happens to be against what the experts have said, or the apparent experts have said.
I think the problem with the Great Barrington Declaration was that it was perhaps too timid. I think I think because it accepted the need that we must take some kind of action, and then when you submit to that, they will basically if you agree to the logic that we're in an unprecedented crisis that requires some kind of action, then they will use their logic. They will use logic within the false narrative to defeat it, because they make the point that, oh well, how can you isolate the elderly in multi-generational households? And indeed, that is in itself a fair point. So what they really should have done was say, no, look, it's a bad outbreak, but it's not unprecedented in terms of how scary, how lethal it is. And people need to accept that human nature is what it is, and it is not reasonable to expect the whole world to close down and people's lives to be ruined and people to die so that you can feel safe. Grow up.
It's not really the watchword that they use now. The phrase they've actually got now, I don't remember who first used it, was that nobody is safe until everybody is safe.
Yeah, that's exactly that.
That's what Liz Truss said this week. Not that exact phrase, but she was on an interview with on Talk Radio, and she said, we will not be safe until everybody in the world has been vaccinated. That's what she actually said.
Yeah,
and she got in Build Back Better as well.
Yeah, no, they're reading from a script. I don't think these careerist politicians even know what they're saying half the time. Like, I bet you if you put obscenities on an auto cue, they would just read it and not even realise what they're reading. They say Build Back Better. I'm not even sure if Liz Truss knows where that term originates. Probably just thinks it sounds good.
I remember first getting suspicious. So as far as how that slogan went, so I first heard it from the Biden campaign, which I think was the first place that it was used. I don't remember if they were the first to come out with that. And I just thought it was a daft slogan because it just didn't sound good. And then we started using it, and it was, hang on. And it was sort of, oh, hang on, isn't that the same slogan that Joe Biden had just brought out in America? And then they used it in Canada as well. And that's where you think, it cannot be a coincidence that all three have just picked the exact same slogan, as for their government.
And it's like they talk about building back from a mess they created, saying, and it's so they're sort of like taking credit for. They remind me a bit of Syndrome, the bad guy in The Incredibles. Where he actually creates a monster so that he can destroy it.
Yeah, he creates a monster, he can destroy it for the credit. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit like that, but unfortunately, people buy into it. It's no, it's like that they must continue with this so that they can sell their cure. Otherwise, no one will. Yeah, no, it's bonkers. But the thing about no one is safe until everyone is safe. I mean, by that logic, we should have been locked down. You know, why was I never called to get my flu vaccine? Flu, by the way.
Just think of how that will go in the future. Think of where that goes, you know, in the long term. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe.
No, exactly. It's equality at all costs, equality of outcome, even if that outcome is horrible. It's this it's utopianism. It's this unwillingness to accept that that the world isn't fair. If the world was
what's
fair,
to stop them rolling out a new set of restrictions this winter?
Neil Ferguson has said that we cannot rule out a fourth lockdown. But
is that what he said?
Yeah, but he reckons we won't need to. You know, I mean, he's feeling generous now. But I love how he talks so casually about how we can't rule it out. It's these people are in complete control over our society. It's completely up to them. They say it, and the government they say jump.
I'm sorry, but I don't remember voting for Neil Ferguson. I don't think any. Who is he to suggest that? Oh, we might not have to. We can rule out this one. I mean, you of all people can't tell us. I mean, for one, you shouldn't be dictating government policy at all, considering how many times you've been wrong in the past. And also, once again, nobody voted for you. You've got no right to start telling people whether or not they can leave their own house.
There's the thing, government ministers, they're scared of responsibility, so they just give it to the scientists and think so they don't, you know, feel the need to make judgment calls. They don't consider the bigger picture. It's only Sweden that held its nerve, and it's a real relief that they did, because otherwise, if every country in the world had locked down, then they would be able to say, oh, well, if we hadn't locked down, it would be a lot worse. But because Sweden didn't lock down and they were all right, you know, then
the closest they did was they had a few months back. They had a partial one.
I wouldn't even call it partial. It was advisory.
It was described as a partial one, but you know, it's nothing compared to what everybody else had.
I always get these people on Twitter who say to me, Sweden is going into lockdown now, and then they send me an article saying Sweden introduces new lockdown.
Partial lockdown.
Yeah, and then I click on it, and I'm like, that's not a lockdown. It's not mandatory, and they're not forcing people to do it, so it's not a lockdown.
And they don't have mask mandates there either.
It's advisory. It's all advisory.
In fact, I think it's more than just advisory, though. I think they actively say, you know, that masks are just cosmetic.
Yeah, they flip-flopped on it a bit, but the crucial thing is they've never made it a criminal offence or an offence not to wear one. And people and that pub landlord from Bath said that a few weeks ago, and the presenter basically smeared him and accused him of lying and said, no, Sweden does have restrictions actually. It's like, yes, but not comparable with lockdowns.
Nothing compared to what we still have here.
No, quite. It's winding down in India. We've just...
Oh, yes.
The BBC have just posted an article about an hour ago where they say, hang on.
India's had it where they say that it's peaked in India, which in other words means that they can't use it as the scare story of the week anymore.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's India COVID. It's the second wave slowing down. It's like, well, of course it is, because, you know, like all outbreaks, they happen quite quickly. They don't rise exponentially. They go up and then they stop. But what's fascinating is how at its peak, the Indian outbreak was no more severe proportionally than the equivalent of a couple of hundred deaths in the UK a day, considering its population.
The narrative around it has been very effective. I mean, of course, it doesn't ignore the fact. I mean, when you talk about the funeral pyres, these great big funeral pyres, for one, it's traditional in India to use funeral pyres over burials. Two, I imagine funerals were probably banned, as they were by the Italian government last year.
Yeah.
And three,
it's interesting, actually. Three, you were saying what
yeah, and three, there's 1 billion people in India. A spike, you know, and I believe they have malaria outbreaks there every year, do they not?
I'm not sure about malaria, but they have big problems like tuberculosis and
Yes, sorry, tuberculosis. That's the one they have there. They have a big outbreak of that every year. We don't cover that as rigorously as that, do we?
no, quite. It's interesting actually. I had a phone call from an Indian, a British Indian politician who was a member of the Conservative Party, and he called me to say that he agreed with my article, and that I wrote an article about putting India into context last week, and apparently people in India have been reading it and agreeing with it, and it's got good feedback. And I've had a one Indian newspaper actually got in touch with me because of it, because they agreed with what I wrote, and also apparently it's to go around filming crematoriums in India is extremely disrespectful to culturally to the people being laid to rest. It's so the Western media has been grossly insensitive and also dishonest in their coverage of it. I mean, imagine if the headline. So India's got twice the population of Europe, roughly.
Yeah.
Imagine if the news on CNN and the BBC was, 2,000 deaths today in Europe, or 3,000 deaths reported today in Europe. People would automatically think 3,000, but then there's nearly
hundreds of millions of people
in
there.
Europe. And people would immediately think, but that's a continent of nearly 50 countries. And they forget to put that in when they talk about India.
It's the obsession with the numerator and never sort of what that is, and never with how much there is. India's done as the scare story of the week, which means bets on the next one. Who's next?
Who do you think it's going to be? I reckon it's going to be...
I'm certain it'll be Turkey.
Turkey, yeah. Because they are going through some kind of spike, and they may be... they've said that they're not going to test people on...
They haven't yet found the big evil Turkish variant yet. They found the Indian variant around the time that we got the Indian scare story. And it was the Brazilian variant, which was all the trouble during the Brazil scare story. So I think it will be Turkey, because this is a country that says that we're allowed to go there as normal on holiday this year.
Do you know what's also interesting? It's only just occurred to me, but that they only started talking about variants in December. Why did we hear nothing about variants for in March, April, May?
For months, they said that they didn't say anything about variants.
No, exactly. They just thought, well, we need something to move the goalposts once the vaccine's rolled out, and people realise that, we don't want to lift these restrictions, even if all the vulnerable are vaccinated. So how can we do that? We'll say, there's new variants, which the vaccine...
Here's a big scary new variant.
It's like, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us that the vaccine wouldn't be a route to freedom? So I think the variant stuff is obviously nonsense. There's no evidence that these variants are any worse than
more to the point, everybody knows that viruses mutate. You don't need to come up with a big scary name for it. You don't need to come up with this whole there's a new scary variant which you need to be terrified of.
Yeah, no, it's a new variant of bullshit, really. But yeah, no, I think money's on Turkey, so that's going on record. I guess is at the next fear-mongering frenzy, which will probably last about a fortnight, and then it will peak, and then they'll forget about it. As they forgot about Brazil, they're going to forget about India in the next few days, and they're going to move on to Turkey, which is closer to home. So that will really get people panicked.
It'll get people panicked about their summer holidays, that's for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. What can I say?
And with that,
on that potential bombshell, it's time to end the show. So yeah,
we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.